Brisbane residents are welcoming the end to the city's COVID lockdown, but businesses are still bracing for losses. Joining us live for more on this is Gus Mandigora, Senior Policy Advisor at the Chamber of Commerce and Industry in Queensland. Appreciate your time. Just how costly was the lockdown?
Well, for starters, we're really relieved that the lockdown is finally being eased, but it was quite costly. CCIQ did a survey of businesses impacted by the lockdown, and we found that 62% are expected to experience an immediate loss in terms of loss of trading, or in terms of stock, or in terms of booking losses. So it was quite costly for affected businesses. And it's also important to point out that in terms of confidence, the knock to confidence was really quite a big issue. And it's something that came up repeatedly in our survey and in our discussion with stakeholders. So yes, we're really relieved. We think this is excellent in terms of preparations for Easter, but those two costs are things that we really have to pay attention to.
And when you look at undermining confidence, I mean, going forward, knowing that these lockdowns can still happen, I think a lot of people thought, well, once the vaccine rollout got underway, we could avoid this sort of thing. It does make the coming months that much more difficult for companies to plan.
Absolutely. The one thing we hear time and time again when talking to businesses is the value of confidence and the value of certainty. So I mentioned the knock to confidence and what this will have, the effects that this will have going forward for Queensland consumers and by extension for businesses. So what we want to urge and what we're busy talking to the Queensland government about is if we can have more certainty around what triggers a lockdown and what parameters they look at when they consider lifting any restrictions, that will really help in order to add to the certainty of how we handle this outbreak. And that will help to reduce any potential loss of confidence occasioned by a snap lockdown such as this one. So we really want to urge certainty and a really clear framework on how decisions around restrictions and the lifting thereof are made.
There was some pressure on the state government to announce last night whether the lockdown would be lifted for today. Were you heaping on that pressure, or did you understand that the health authorities did need to wait for the very latest data today to make that call?
Well, we do understand that it's important to have all the information before making a decision. But the point that we keep emphasizing and that our stakeholders emphasize to us is if we understand when exactly the decision-making point is, we can plan accordingly. And if we also understand what sort of decisions might take place or might be affected, that's also helpful. So to give an example, if we were likely to go into another lockdown, would that lockdown have been for 3 days or for 1 week or for 2 weeks? And if it was going to be lifted, it was going to be lifted with effect from what time and what date. So if we have that sort of clarity, it helps. Even though we understand that the Queensland government or any other government needs to have all the data at its disposal and needs to have all the information at hand before making a final decision. That certainty is really the key piece for us.
Yeah, look, I mean, as you pointed out, it is great news. This lockdown has just lifted, in fact, in the last 20 minutes or so there in Queensland. But there are these ongoing restrictions now for another couple of weeks, and those restrictions are statewide. Do you agree with that decision? There has been some comments, some criticism about the fact that the restrictions will be statewide as opposed to more targeted in affected areas.
Well, so on the one hand, we completely understand the health imperatives in terms of keeping the virus under check, but we have been advocating to the Queensland government to consider just how geographically large Queensland is. So, for example, our counterparts in Cairns are telling us we're over a 20-hour drive from the snap lockdown in Greater Brisbane. Can there be some sort of a differentiation for us? So, yes, we do agree that there should be or there could be some differentiation between hotspots and places that are much further away in a state as geographically large as Queensland. So we'll be urging and we'll be talking to the Queensland government about that potential differentiation, especially for areas that are outside Greater Brisbane and that are outside Southeast Queensland. They do feel aggrieved that they have to abide by a lot of the same restrictions that apply further down south, even though a lot of them haven't had any community transmission or any cases for that matter. So that's one thing we keep talking to the Queensland government about, and it's something that our members north of Southeast Queensland raise with us on a regular basis.
Because those restrictions do have a real impact on some companies' bottom line, don't they?
Absolutely. So the one thing that we hear about is, for example, when it comes to the density that establishment are allowed to have in terms of patrons per square meter, there's a real clamour and a real appetite to have that eased north of Southeast Queensland. So we just saw South Australia easing restrictions, and the question that businesses north of SCQ are asking us, Southeast Queensland are asking us, is can we have an easing of those sort of restrictions? So that affects their profitability straight away, but also that affects consumer confidence in a good way if those restrictions are lifted. And I think it's also important to go back to the confidence issue, because we believe that once people understand that there's a differentiation taking place between hotspots and non-hotspots, it adds to consumer confidence and it allows people to travel further north for holiday, for example, if there's an opportunity to do so.
Gus Mandigora from the Queensland Chamber of Commerce and Industry, appreciate you joining us and your insights. Thanks so much.
Thank you very much.